Cheated out of his rightful land, a humble Nigerian farmer accepts a worthless bush plot, only to unearth diamonds that make him rich overnight. As his sudden fortune lifts an entire village, his jealous brother's betrayal spirals into vengeance, murder, and an unforgettable lesson. The soil we despise may hide the very blessing we need. Hello friends, enjoy this relaxing moment with Valentino's stories. Remember to subscribe and share your thoughts in the comments section, and generously hit the like button because it means a lot to us. Please relax and enjoy as we dive in the story. Jaok rose before dawn every day, long before the first rooster declared morning. The red soil of the village clung to his bare feet as he hurried toward whichever farm had hired him that week. Sometimes he carried a borrowed hoe, other days he dragged a cutlass with a ragged handle. Whatever the tool, he worked until calluses split, all so that his younger brother Uchenna could sit in a concrete classroom far away and dream big dreams. The brothers had grown up in a house of weather-beaten mud bricks. Their mother's laughter once filled the rooms, but her voice vanished when malaria struck and medicine arrived too late. Jaok, only 14, became cook, cleaner, and field hand, while their father, Papanwafer, wrestled grief and failing health. Uchenna, 5 years younger, clung to Jaok's leg during the burial, not fully understanding death but sensing an empty space that no story could fill. Years slipped by. Jaok's shoulders broadened, his skin darkened under relentless sun, and his name became a small legend. Villagers called him the boy who never complained, the one who carried 2 baskets of cassava where others carried one. Families trusted him with harvest counts. Traders asked him to guard their yams on market day. He saved every coin, hiding them in a wooden box beneath a loose floor tile, each copper piece a step toward Uchenna's fees. Uchenna, meanwhile, wore clean uniforms and polished sandals, gifts bought with Jaok's sweat. He wrote letters about mathematics prizes and football matches. Each letter ended with the same promise: "Brother, when I finish, you will rest." Jaok read those words by lamplight, smiling despite cracked palms, believing that love returns to the giver. But illness is a stubborn guest. Papanwafer's cough deepened until even the midwife's herbs failed. His chest rattled at night, each breath sounding like a door creaking open to another world. One evening, as harmattan dust drifted through the roof, he called his sons to his mat. An oil lamp flickered, stretching shadows across the clay walls. "My sons," he began, voice thin as dry leaves. "Our mother waits for me. I have only 2 plots to give." He paused, coughing until tears filled his eyes. Jaok reached to steady him, but the old man raised a hand. "Jaok, as my first son, you shall take the strip beside the open road. Travelers will see whatever you plant or build there. Uchenna, you will have the larger piece deeper in the bush. The soil is rich, it needs patience." Jaok bowed low. "Thank you, Papa. I will honor it." Across the mat, Uchenna's face hardened. He remembered the roadside plot, sandy, trampled by cattle, littered by passers-by. The bushland held thick loam and tall palms, yet it lay far from eyes that praised success. Why should his elder brother receive the land everyone admired while he, the student with certificates, was sent to wrestle thorns? He forced a crooked smile. "Yes, Papa," he murmured, folding his arms. Papanwafer, exhausted, lay back. "Promise me," he whispered, "that you will care for each other." "We promise," both brothers answered, though only one heart was at rest. That night the moon hung low and red. Crickets chirped, a dog barked, and Papanwafer slipped quietly into eternity before dawn returned. When the village bell announced his passing, women wailed and men gathered palm fronds for the burial. Jaok helped wash the body, tears mixing with the water. Uchenna stood at the doorway, fists clenched, thoughts already circling boundaries, measurements, and future plans. At the graveside, Jaok felt the weight of first son's duty settle like a stone on his chest. He vowed to cultivate whatever land was his and, above all, to keep his mother's last lesson alive: family first. Beside him, Uchenna stared at the fresh mound of earth, not with sorrow, but with calculation, a silent seed of resentment taking root beneath the solemn sky. The elders whispered that night around their hearths, praising Jaok's loyalty and predicting a bright harvest for him. They also shook their heads at Uchenna's silence, unsure whether it was grief or pride. In that hush, destiny quietly adjusted its scales. The crowing of cocks no longer woke Jaok with urgency, it woke him with habit. Dawn after dawn, he still rose, strapped on his worn sandals, and crossed the dew-wet path toward other people's ridges of yam and cassava. Yet something had changed inside him. Each swing of the hoe felt heavier than the last, not because of age or hunger, but because of the widening silence between him and the brother he loved. At first, the silence arrived dressed as excuses. Whenever Jayok borrowed a neighbor's mobile phone to check on Uchenna, a clipped voice floated over the crackling line, "Brother, I'm in the middle of something." Another time, "I'll ring you once this meeting ends." The promised ring never came. Weeks became months. Months became 2 full years. Despite the distance, Jayok kept believing. He pictured his brother drafting reports in an air-conditioned office, shining shoes tapping polished floors, greeting managers with confident handshakes. On market days he asked travelers for news from the city, hoping someone had seen Uchenna and could describe his smile. No traveler ever had. Then, on a bright market morning, a rumble echoed through the village square. Children scattered as a gleaming sedan rolled over red dust, its tires humming like bees. When the vehicle halted beside the chief's hut, a tall man stepped out wearing sunglasses and a tailored shirt that caught the sun as if woven with mirrors. Gold buttons winked at every curious eye. Whispers rippled through the crowd. "Is that Uchenna?" Some hardly recognized him. His cheeks had filled out. His accent carried chill city vowels. He walked with a swing that said, "I own the ground beneath your feet." Women praised his success. Young men in faded jerseys gawked at the car. Uchenna accepted their admiration with careless nods. He did not mention the elder brother who once patched his torn shorts or the man who went hungry so he could eat. Instead, he brought out rolled blueprints and spread them on a wooden bench. A hush fell. Lines and rectangles marked out a handsome bungalow, complete with a tiled veranda and 2 satellite dishes. "I intend to raise this house right here," he declared, tapping the paper. Heads turned toward the only roadside plot big enough for such a structure, Jayok's inheritance. The compound lay beside the main track, where traders from 3 villages passed daily. Everybody knew who owned it. Word reached Jayok within the hour. Dust clung to his forehead as he hurried from a cocoa farm, hands still stained with sap. He arrived breathless at the square just as Uchenna folded the blueprints. "Brother," Jayok began quietly, "that land belongs to me." His voice cracked, not in anger but in disbelief. Uchenna pushed his sunglasses higher and laughed, a sharp metallic sound. You spend your life bending over ridges. That spot is wasted on someone who can't even sign his name in English." Gasps fluttered among the bystanders. Embarrassment washed over Jayok. Shame burned his ears. Yet he still tried to reason. "Father entrusted that piece to me the night before he left us." Uchenna's reply was a shrug. "Old men make mistakes." The following evening Uchenna visited several elders, bearing envelopes fat with new banknotes. He dropped one on a low stool, another into a trembling palm, a third under a calabash lid. The next morning the council gathered and, after a brief mutter of prayers, announced that, for the good of development, Jayok would exchange his roadside plot for the quieter field in the bush. Their verdict landed like a club on Jayok's shoulders. People who once praised his honesty now avoided his eyes. A few murmured pity, but no one challenged the elders. Land disputes, they said, should die quickly before they grow teeth. Jayok carried the judgment in silence. That night, after the village lamp sputtered out, he walked to the small mound that marked his father's grave behind their childhood home. The sky glittered with stars, distant and cold. Kneeling on brittle grass, Jayok placed both palms on the red earth. He spoke softly, afraid the wind might steal his words. "Papa, I gave my youth to see him shine. Yet today his shine blinds even justice." Tears slipped down his cheeks, carving clean lines through the day's dust. "If this is my road, give me strength to walk it." Fireflies blinked among the bushes like scattered embers, but no answer came, only the hush of night insects and the slow thud of his heart. He rose, wiping his face with the back of his hand, and turned toward the dark outline of the bush farmland. Tomorrow he would begin clearing thorny shrubs there, because tomorrow always asked for sweat no matter how deep the sorrow of today. As he walked away, the village slept, unaware that destiny, quiet and stubborn, had just chosen a new place to scatter its seeds. The new plot was so deep in the forest that even sparrows seemed surprised to see a man there. Dense shrubs clung to Jyoke's legs as he swung his cutlass, carving narrow pathways between tangled vines. He worked alone, dawn to twilight, with only chattering monkeys and rustling leaves for company. Although his muscles ached, he felt strangely calm. Every swing of the blade was a promise to himself that defeat would not live in his bones. Before planting a single seed, he needed water. The nearest stream lay half a mile downhill, fine for a stroll, impossible for daily farming. Jyoke weighed his options and settled on the hardest one. He would dig a well by hand. He traced a circle in the soil with a stick, then set aside 3 smooth stones to mark north, south, and west, just as old farmers once taught him. On the first day, he sliced away the top layer of earth, humming hymns his mother used to sing while shelling beans. By sunset, he had a pit as deep as his knees. He went home, washed blistered palms in cold water, and returned at dawn with renewed will. Dust clung to sweat on his back as the sun climbed higher, turning the pit into a clay oven. Mid-morning of the second day, his shovel suddenly jarred against something solid, a metallic clang that echoed through the quiet clearing. Thinking it was a buried root, he dropped to his knees and scraped gently with his fingertips. A small object emerged, coated in reddish soil. When he rubbed it against his sleeve, light shot across its surface like a captive rainbow. His breath caught. "Could this be a gem?" he murmured, voice barely louder than the wind. He lifted the stone toward the sunlight filtering through palm fronds. It blazed with clear brightness, unlike any pebble he had ever seen. The pitiless heat above felt distant. All he saw was that brilliant point of light resting in his calloused hand. A single thought flashed across his mind: diamond. The idea seemed absurd. Diamonds belonged in distant tales, newspapers about foreign mines or city shops with glass counters, not in a forgotten patch of bushland. Still trembling, he tucked the stone into the small pocket inside his worn shorts and forced himself to keep digging. Curiosity pushed him harder than thirst. The afternoon wore on. With every thrust of the shovel, he half expected disappointment, yet a strange energy coursed through him. Just after the sun slid past its peak, his blade struck another hard lump. This time he used the blunt handle to pry it free. Out rolled a second crystal, larger than the first, its facets catching shards of sun and flinging them against the pit walls. Jyoke's knees felt weak. He sat at the edge of the hole, both stones glinting on his palm, heartbeat drumming in his ears. 2 treasures in one day, on land everyone called worthless. He remembered his brother's insult, the elder's judgment, the laughter that stung like nettles. A tear slipped down his cheek, not from sorrow but from astonishment. Evening shadows crept across the clearing. Cicadas began their chorus, and a chill hinted at nightfall. Jyoke wrapped the stones in a scrap of cloth torn from an old head tie, tied it securely, and slid the bundle into a hollow under a pile of firewood. He covered the pit with fronds so passing eyes would see nothing unusual. Then he picked up his shovel and headed home under a rising moon, mind racing faster than his feet. Questions battered him. Who could confirm what these are? Should I tell anyone? Yet under those questions throbbed a dawning certainty. Something profound had shifted. The land he had accepted in silence, the plot meant to humble him, had whispered a secret meant for faithful ears. In the hush of that realization, Jyoke felt the first stirring of hope strong enough to rival every past humiliation. Jyoke never closed his eyes that night. He placed the 2 sparkling stones on the wooden stool beside his mat and watched lamplight dance across their surfaces. Every few minutes he craned forward, touching them to make sure they were still there. Perhaps they were nothing but pieces of glass. Perhaps he had imagined their fire. Yet whenever the flame quivered, rainbow flecks darted around the room, whispering truth. Before dawn painted the sky ash blue, he wrapped the gems inside a scrap of faded cloth, slid that bundle into a cracked plastic bag, and tucked everything beneath the singlet pressed against his chest. The morning air hugged him with harmattan chill as he set off. He chose the narrow footpath that skirted the hills, avoiding the main road where neighbors might greet him with questions. Birds chirped overhead, goats tugged at tether ropes. Jyoke walked faster. The town sat 8 long miles away, its corrugated roofs glimmering like tin fish in the distance. By the time he reached the outskirts, sweat had dampened the cloth over his hidden treasure. He slowed his steps, blending with traders pushing wheelbarrows of tomatoes and women balancing calabashes on their heads. His destination lay beyond the noisy central market, an old jewelry shop crouched beneath a sagging neem tree, known for honest dealings. A tiny bell tinkled as he entered. The shop smelled of furniture polish and burning incense. Glass counters held necklaces, rings, and earrings that winked under hanging bulbs. An elderly man straightened from a stool. He wore steel-rimmed glasses and a loop dangling from a thread around his neck. "Good morning, sir," the jeweler greeted, voice warm like new bread. "What can I do for you?" Jayok glanced at the door, then at a teenage assistant sweeping near the back. In a low tone he said, "I would like you to look at something, privately." Curiosity flickered in the jeweler's eyes. He gestured toward a side table covered in velvet. When the assistant stepped outside to dump dust, the elder locked the door and drew the blind, muting the open-air market's bustle. Only then did Jayok fish out the cloth bundle. His fingers trembled as he unfolded it and set the stones on the velvet. The jeweler lifted one gem with tweezers, brought his magnifying glass close, and inhaled sharply. Lines around his eyes pinched tighter while he rotated the crystal, studying the facets, checking for flaws invisible to ordinary sight. He placed it down and inspected the second. Moments stretched like rope. "Where did these come from?" he finally asked, voice a notch lower. "A field that belongs to me," Jayok replied. His palms felt moist. The jeweler pressed both hands flat on the counter. "My friend, you have discovered diamonds, high clarity, impressive carat weight. In plain words, they are worth more money than many people see in a lifetime." Blood drummed in Jayok's ears. He sagged onto a stool, gripping its edge. "How much, roughly?" "Together." "Several 100 million naira, perhaps more if buyers compete," the jeweler said. "But riches attract knives as well as smiles. You must treat this matter like a nest of scorpions." He pulled open a drawer, took out a small padded envelope, and slid the gems inside. "Keep them here for your return trip," he advised, writing a seal number across the flap. Then he scribbled a lawyer's contact and the name of a reputable gem broker in the city. "These two will secure export permits, negotiate price, and protect your identity." Jayok swallowed hard. "Why help me?" The old man smiled gently. "A blessing should not destroy the one who receives it. Promise me 3 things. Speak to no one until your land is protected, open a bank account outside this town, and remember that wealth counts for nothing if you lose your life." "I promise," Jayok whispered. The jeweler handed back the envelope, now hidden inside a plain paper bag, and unlocked the door. Street noise flooded in. Jayok stepped out, heart pounding, yet lighter than when he had entered. The world looked unchanged. Children chasing tires, hawkers calling prices. Only Jayok knew that within his shirt pocket, 2 stones glowed like captured starlight, waiting to rewrite the story others had written for him. The drive from the capital back to the village felt unreal, as if Jayok were steering through someone else's dream. Only 2 days earlier he had stood in a polished office, hands damp against a mahogany table, while a gray-bearded foreign dealer inspected his stones beneath a lamp the color of morning sun. The buyer's verdict, Nigerian naira 320 million for both gems, still echoed in Jayok's ears each time the tires hummed over a pothole. His signature was now inked on papers stamped by a lawyer, and the money rested safely inside a freshly opened account whose balance he dared not repeat aloud. Before leaving the city, the jeweler pressed 3 rules upon him. First, build a wall around your treasure ground before any rumor escapes. Second, never reveal the source of your sudden fortune, not even to kin. Third, wear humility like a second skin, pride invites predators. Jayok repeated those rules all the way home, letting them settle deeper than joy. At dawn the next morning, a new black Toyota Hilux rolled through the dusty village gate. People watering goats paused mid-pour, children abandoned spinning tires, and a widow pushing a firewood bundle stopped to stare. The young driver who jumped out wore plain slippers and a faded shirt, yet his calm smile drew more attention than the shiny vehicle itself. Only when he lifted the bonnet to cool the engine did neighbors recognize the scar on his forearm, Jayok's scar, earned years ago from a rusted hoe. He did not linger for greetings. Instead, he drove straight to the bush plot, jumped down, and measured the boundary with a surveyor hired from town. Before the midday sun peaked, 3 lorries growled up the narrow track, each loaded with cement sacks, steel rods, and bundles of barbed wire. A dozen laborers unfolded from the back, carrying water bottles and lunch flasks. The taskmaster spread out blueprints on the Hilux's bonnet, a rectangle of reinforced concrete footings and columns high enough to turn away the boldest intruder. Villagers soon gathered at a safe distance, shading their eyes against drifting dust. Hammers rang, pickaxes split stubborn earth, and mixers churned gravel into gray paste. By sundown, metal posts jutted from trenches like spears planted by an invisible army. Lanterns appeared after dark, and the crew kept working under the harsh glare until crickets surrendered their song to generators. Whispers rumbled through compounds that night. Who bankrolled this project? Did he join politics? Perhaps oil money? Ritual money? No one offered an answer, only bigger guesses. Day 2 opened with a clatter of scaffolding. The wall climbed breast-high, then head-high. Soon it towered above every coconut tree on the plot. Fresh barbed wire curled along the top, glinting like a crown of thorns. When the gate, heavy steel, double-locked, swung into place, the land vanished from public sight, replaced by a silent statement that shouted louder than gossip ever could. The rumor finally reached Uchenna in his roadside bungalow while he polished the chrome bumper of his sedan. He snatched his phone, missed the handle, retrieved it with shaking hands, and called a cousin for details. The cousin merely said, "You should see for yourself," then hung up. Within minutes Uchenna was striding down the dusty lane, shoes kicking small stones. What he saw froze him mid-step. His brother's forgotten bush field now encircled by concrete higher than a man's reach, its surface still wet and dark. A road grader idled nearby like a watchful beast. Engineers pored over clipboards. Guards in reflective vests lounged by the gate, discussing welding rods. Uchenna's voice cut through the afternoon. "Jyoke!" he barked. Jyoke emerged from behind a stack of cement blocks, wiping sweat off his brow. "You're here, brother," he said evenly. "What madness is this?" Uchenna demanded, sweeping an arm toward the wall. "Why pour money into empty bush? That ground can't feed a family." Jyoke considered the gate, then the distant treetops before replying, "I'm safeguarding what the earth has given me." Uchenna scoffed, eyes narrowing. "Safeguarding? With whose money? People say shady deals drive such speed." The hint of accusation dripped like poison sap. "I work within my means," Jyoke said, voice calm but immovable. Uchenna stepped closer, lowering his tone to a hiss. "Tell me the truth. I'm your brother. If you stumbled upon wealth..." Jyoke met his gaze without blinking. "The same brother who once called this place a waste." Color drained from Uchenna's face, replaced by simmering anger. He spun on his heel, declaring loudly enough for bystanders to hear, "Mark my words, I'll discover what darkness fuels this." Then he marched back to the main road, leaving a trail of scuffed footprints. Behind him, cement mixers drummed on, indifferent. Jyoke signaled a worker to tighten the gate's final bolt. When the padlock snapped shut, it sounded strangely like destiny closing, and at the same time, cracking wide open for the man who had once been pushed into the bush. Uchenna could hardly breathe as he watched the gray wall stretching around the once-mocked bushland. Dust from the fresh cement still floated in the air, stinging his eyes. Workers in bright vests moved in and out of the gate like ants, wheelbarrows squeaking, generators roaring. A guard stood by the entrance with a clipboard, ticking off deliveries. Uchenna folded his arms across his chest, pulse pounding. "Where did he get this money?" he hissed to a friend who had wandered over. "Yesterday he was begging me for a cup of Gary. Today he builds a fortress." The friend shuffled his feet, unsure how to answer. No rumor sounded big enough to explain the sight in front of them. Jyoke, meanwhile, kept his head down. He arrived early each morning in the black Hilux, greeting the foreman with a quiet nod and sharing cola nuts with laborers before the first shovel struck the soil. When villagers asked what he was planning, he simply smiled and said, "I'm protecting my future." He never raised his voice, never flaunted his new vehicle, and never showed anger at the whispers that followed him like shadows. 2 days later, before questions cooled, the village awoke to the rumble of another convoy. A long trailer, its tires taller than children, growled to a stop near the main junction, land that once belonged to a late village chief and was rumored too costly for ordinary folk. The driver swung down, waved at the curious crowd, and pulled open the canvas. Steel rods, roofing sheets, and pallets of cement glinted in the early light. A lanky engineer unrolled blueprints across the bonnet of a pickup. His team staked corners with wooden pegs, clicking tape measures in practiced rhythm. An assistant hammered a temporary sign into the ground, "Jyoke's Residence, under construction." Breath left the watchers in one huge sigh. Some gasped aloud, others slapped hands over open mouths. The name told a story no rumor could match. By twilight, tower floodlights bathed the site in white glare. The hum of mixers churned long after hens settled on rooftops. Children on their way to fetch water lingered at the edge of the safety tape just to see sparks fly from welding torches. Every hour, bricks climbed higher. It seemed as if the building grew while people blinked. Elders who once pocketed Uchena's bribe could not hide their shame. They shuffled past Jyoke in the market with heads lowered, greeting him in trembling voices, "My son, good afternoon." Jyoke greeted them back with steady respect, never mentioning the judgment that had stripped him of his roadside inheritance. His calm made their guilt heavier than stones. Uchenna felt the village's new mood like cold wind across his skin. Where people once hailed him as the city man, now they whispered behind their hands. At the palm wine joint a mason remarked, "Greed blinded that one." Another answered, "He traded love for show." Uchenna's ears burned. He stopped visiting the joint. Yet Jyoke remained gentle. He donated 20 bags of cement to the unfinished church building and refused the priest's public thanks. He hired idle youths, the very boys who had laughed when he first cleared bush, to earn a daily wage on his site. He even paid for their lunch, insisting that nobody swing a hammer on an empty stomach. Soon, cash touched pockets that had known only lint, and laughter returned to their households. The mansion itself rose gracefully. Ground floor with airy rooms, a polished staircase winding toward a bright landing, and a balcony shaped like a half-moon for evening breeze. Women carrying vegetables to the market slowed to stare at the fresh plaster walls. "Imagine," one said, "they called that land cursed." Another shook her head, replying, "It was our eyes that were cursed, not the soil." Despite the noise and triumph, Jyoke never missed dawn prayers beside his father's grave. At cockcrow he walked there, knelt, and thanked God for each brick laid, asking for humility to match the blessing. A neighbor once watched from a distance and later told her daughter, "That man wears wealth the way a tree wears fruit, quietly until you come close." Uchenna stopped passing the mansion site altogether. His own flashy bungalow, once the pride of the roadside, looked smaller each time he glanced at it. The paint seemed to fade faster, the roof less shiny. He lay awake at night replaying every choice that led to this moment. The insults, the bribe, the laughter at Jyoke's useless plot. Regret gnawed at him, but guilt never turned into apology. Instead, bitterness stewed, thick as unboiled ogbono soup. Meanwhile, Jyoke's reputation blossomed. Travelers resting under the mango trees heard his story and carried it to distant markets. A quiet farmer cheated of land finds fortune in the very soil meant to humble him, then returns kindness for cruelty. Some called it destiny, others called it divine justice. Children chasing grasshoppers by the fence decided they would dig wells of their own one day. And so, without a crown or throne, Jyoke became the village's unwritten king, his scepter a shovel, his throne a half-finished balcony, his power the simple act of turning curses into harvests and answering envy with unbroken grace. Nights in the roadside bungalow had grown long for Uchenna. He would lie on his woven mat, staring at a cracked ceiling, replaying every rumor the villagers traded at dusk. First came the talk of the wall. Then the story of trucks unloading marble tiles. Now the whisper that Jyoke had ordered a generator the size of a small bus. Each tale scraped against his pride like sand against bare skin. Sleep turned thin. When his eyes finally closed, he saw the same picture. Jyoke strolling through the village with gentle steps while everyone bowed their heads in respect that once belonged to him. Unable to endure another restless hour, Uchenna wrapped himself in a dark cloth and slipped outside. The half-moon cast pale stripes across the dusty road. He avoided the footpath that led toward the new mansion, cutting instead behind fallow fields until he reached the old cocoa trail that vanished into thick forest. Somewhere beyond the tangled undergrowth lived Aguilonu, the diviner feared for speaking with spirits of earth and shadow. Branches clawed at Uchenna's arms as he pushed through vines. At times he nearly turned back, but jealousy tugged him forward like an invisible rope. After an hour of stumbling over roots, the trees parted and revealed a clearing lit by smoldering torches. Charms dangling from branches rattled in the wind. Bones, goat, monkey, perhaps human, hung on strings, creaking softly. A clay hut squatted in the center, its doorway draped with crimson cloth. Uchenna swallowed hard and stepped inside. The air smelled of damp earth and burning herbs. An elderly man sat cross-legged before a low wooden altar. One eye was clear and sharp, the other clouded white like river mist. His chest was bare, traced with scarified patterns, and a long staff rested across his knees. For a moment neither spoke. The only sound was the slow drip of water somewhere in the darkness. Uchenna dropped to his knees, forehead almost touching the earthen floor. "Great One," he began, voice trembling, "I seek answers about my brother. Yesterday he had nothing. Today he builds palaces. Tell me where such riches rise from." Aguilonu did not answer. Instead, he opened a leather pouch, poured a handful of ivory cowries onto a red mat, and rolled them between calloused palms. He murmured in a language older than the village and blew across the shells. They skittered across the cloth, then settled. Silence thickened. At last the diviner fixed his clear eye on Uchenna. His voice sounded like two stones grinding. "You come with envy coiled around your heart." Uchenna lifted his head. "I come for truth. I must know what magic he uses." The old man shook his head slowly, then spoke a word that meant fool in the tongue of hunters. "The ground you despised holds gifts from the spirits," he said. "Because you scorned it, its mouth stayed shut for you. But it opened for the one who toiled with clean hands and quiet spirit." Uchenna blinked in confusion. "Gifts? Hidden underground." "Stones of fire," Aguilonu replied. "Precious, bright as morning stars. They waited to honor humility. You spat on them with pride, so they turned their faces away." A rush of heat burned Uchenna's cheeks. He remembered mocking laughter, the bribe, the elders ruling. Regret prickled, but ambition quickly smothered it. If those treasures were truly meant for me, there must be a path to claim at least a share. His voice dropped to a plea. "Show me how." Aguilonu's staff struck the floor with a sharp crack. The torches flared, throwing jagged shadows across the hut. "Touch that land again and the soil will drink your blood," he warned. "The guardian spirits have chosen. Any further plot you weave will return upon your head." Fear sliced through Uchenna, yet he pressed on. "Then how do I free myself from this shame?" "Go to the one you wronged," the seer said, eyes glinting like wet granite. "Kneel before him. Ask for forgiveness, not coins. Wealth can mend roofs, but only mercy heals the heart." A cold silence followed. Uchenna rose slowly, legs unsteady. Aguilonu's expression softened, carrying a weariness older than the forest outside. "Pride is a gourd full of scorpions," he murmured. "Drink from it and you swallow poison." With those words echoing behind him, Uchenna backed out of the hut. Night air slapped his face. The path home felt longer, each step haunted by visions of swallowing dust, of the ground yawning open beneath greedy feet. Yet another voice whispered inside him, a voice still stubborn, there must be another way. By dawn he reached the village boundary, torn between begging for mercy and forging a darker road. Behind him, deep in the forest, the shrine's torches guttered out, leaving only curling smoke, a silent reminder that the gods were already watching. Uchenna's mind became a furnace. Each brick added to Jayok's mansion threw fresh sparks onto the coals of resentment already smoldering in his chest. He began to avoid the path that passed the tall fence. Still, the sound of hammers drifted on the evening wind, and every strike felt like a mocking laugh. Sleep deserted him. He paced the floorboards of his bungalow until the cock crowed and the shadows gave way to dawn. One moonless night he finally yielded to the dark suggestions that had been whispering for weeks. After locking his gate, he wrapped himself in a hooded cloth and walked a narrow footpath toward the next district. Far off the main road, at the edge of a scraggly rubber plantation, stood an unpainted shack with no signboard. Locals called it the last stop, a place where men with worries heavier than their pockets looked for solutions darker than their fears. Smoke from cheap tobacco floated in the single-room bar. Wooden stools circled a low table where dice clicked and coins changed hands. In the far corner sat a muscular man with a jagged scar across his chin. He was known in 3 villages as Terror, both name and warning. His eyes tracked Uchenna's approach like a hawk follows a chick leaving its nest. Uchenna removed a thick envelope from under his wrapper and placed it on the table without greeting. "Half of what you'll earn," he said in a steady whisper. "The rest comes when my problem disappears." Terror tipped the envelope. Bundles of new Naira notes slid halfway out. He pushed them back with a calloused finger. "Describe the problem." "A man. Medium height, broad shoulders, short beard, drives a black Hilux marked with silver stripes." Uchenna handed over a small passport photo. "He takes this route after leaving his building site each evening." Terror inspected the photo under the lantern light, then glanced at the truck of liquor in the yard, calculating escape roads. Finally, he nodded once. "We move at midnight. You hear nothing, you see nothing." One sharp whistle summoned 2 young men lounging by the doorway. They lifted automatic rifles from a rice sack, cocked them with practiced ease, and waited for the signal. Uchenna licked his dry lips, pushed back his chair, and slipped into the night. Each cricket chirp seemed to chant traitor. Still, his feet kept moving. Greed tightened its glove around his heart, squeezing until pity felt like dust. Hours later, Jyoke drove slowly after another long day at the site. Fresh roofing sheets gleamed under floodlights he had switched off minutes earlier. He listened to the hum of the Hilux engine and pictured the house completed, villagers harvesting pride from its shadow. A yawn squeezed past his lips. He promised himself a proper supper when he reached home. The promise hung unfinished. Headlights flared in his windscreen, and a battered sedan swerved violently into his lane, blocking the narrow road. Brakes screeched. Jyoke's truck jolted to a halt, dust curling around it like fog. 3 figures leaped out of the sedan, guns glinting under the moon. "Hands high," a voice barked. Jyoke's palms reached skyward before his mind caught up. Knees hit gravel. He tasted metal in his mouth, though he had not bitten his tongue. Cold fear threaded through his veins. So this is how it ends, he thought, closing his eyes when a pair of boots stopped inches from his own shoes. A long pause. Then a softer command, "Look at me." He opened his eyes. The leader's face hovered above, partly hidden by a cap. Recognition flickered in the man's gaze like a spark catching dry grass. He swore under his breath, stepped closer, tilted Jyoke's chin. "You," he muttered, almost to himself. Confusion joined terror on Jyoke's face. "Sir, have we met?" The gunman removed his cap. A faint burned scar marred one cheek. Jyoke's memory clicked into place. Weeks earlier, outside City Mart supermarket, an accused shoplifter had been surrounded by an angry crowd. Jyoke, flush with new funds yet still wearing an old shirt, had pleaded with the mob, handed cash to the store manager, and led the trembling thief to safety. "You paid for my mistake that day," the gunman said, voice thick with something that sounded like shame. "You told them everyone deserves a second chance." He lowered his rifle. "Tonight, mercy pays you back." He signaled to his partners. "Guns down, we leave." The accomplices hesitated but obeyed when they saw his eyes. Jyoke swallowed hard. "Tell me, who sent you?" he asked, voice hoarse. The leader shook his head. "Knowledge can poison faster than bullets. Stay watchful. Someone you trust wants you underground." He replaced his cap, climbed into the sedan, and reversed down the dirt track. Red taillights winked once, then disappeared into the bush. Jyoke remained kneeling until the night regained its usual sounds: crickets, far-off frogs, a breeze through dry maize stalks. Only then did he sit on the road, elbows on knees, heart thundering with grateful astonishment. Mercy, extended in a moment, had returned like a shield against unseen knives. Yet the warning chilled him. Kindness could not blind him to the enemy now crouching in darkness. He rose, dusted gravel off his trousers, and drove home with headlights off, hugging the shoulder of the road. At his gate he parked, switched off the engine, and breathed deeply, letting terror drain away. Tomorrow, he decided, locks would be changed, guards doubled, and prayers whispered with greater fervor. Under a moon half hidden by drifting clouds, Jyoke finally understood. Fortunes attract shadows, but compassion can summon unexpected light. Still, the night had shown its teeth, and he sensed it would bite again before things found peace. Morning in the village arrived bright and noisy, as always. Little boys whipped homemade kites down the dusty lane, goats darted between tomato stalls, and elderly men tipped gourds of palm wine while teasing each other about rheumatic knees. The easy chatter stopped the moment a familiar engine growled into earshot. A black Hilux, polished to a mirror shine with 2 silver streaks down its flanks, rolled past the square at a steady, unhurried pace. Jyoke sat behind the wheel, arm resting on the window, nodding greetings as though nothing in the world could touch him. Behind the broad leaves of a mango tree, Uchenna watched, frozen by a surge of disbelief that left his throat dry. The last image he expected at sunrise was his brother alive, healthy, smiling, no less. A chill that had nothing to do with morning dew traveled up his spine. They promised the road would be clear of him by now, he thought, clenching his fists until his nails bit skin. All day the scene replayed in his mind, stoking anger into a blaze. When dusk smeared orange across the sky, he slipped out of his compound and headed for the shack beyond the rubber plantation, the same hidden joint where evil bargains found willing hands. Kerosene lamps burned low, throwing long shadows that twitched on mud-brick walls. Terror, scar-jawed and broad-shouldered, lounged at a small table chewing bitter cola. Card players paused mid-game as Uchenna burst in, knocking a stool aside. "You swore the deed was settled," he rasped, voice raw. "Yet my brother drove past me this morning as large as life." Terror regarded him with an unsettling calm, then clicked his tongue. "Your brother spared me once. I decided I won't stain my hands with his blood." His words fell like stones in a still pond, ripples of tension spreading through the room. Fury twisted Uchenna's features. "Spare me your moral sermon. I paid for a service, deliver or refund." He slammed a palm on the table so hard the cola nut jumped. Terror's pupils narrowed to dark slits. "Money spent," he said, voice barely above a whisper. "And your problem is bigger than cash." Snickers rose from the other men. Embarrassment flared inside Uchenna, quickly morphing into reckless rage. His gaze flicked to a pistol resting on the tabletop beside a half-empty bottle. In one desperate lunge, he reached for it, certain that fear would keep the others frozen a split second too long. It didn't. Terror moved like a striking puff adder, seizing the gun first, barrel stiff-armed straight between Uchenna's eyes. The room fell into a hush so thick it choked. Dice hung motionless in mid-air as a player's hand stalled. "You planned to kill the man who fed you from birth," Terror growled. "Now you'd shoot those who spared you. Look behind you, boy. There's nothing left but the cliff you carved yourself." Sweat clarified Uchenna's vision. He saw the hammer pulled back, saw his own reflection in Terror's unblinking stare, saw every wrong step that led him here. Words stumbled from his mouth. Threats, pleas, promises, but none found purchase. Terror shook his head in quiet disgust. "Sometimes poison must drink itself," he said, finger tightening. A deafening crack split the silence. Powder smoke curled toward the rafters while Uchenna crashed backward, chair splintering beneath him, a dark stain blooming across his white shirt. Dice clattered to the floor, their quiet rattling the only sound in the stunned hut. The night wind carried the smell of wet earth as 2 of Terror's men hefted the limp body onto the back of a pickup. They drove along the bush track until the shack's lanterns were pinpoints behind them, then rolled the corpse into the grass at a bend few travelers used after sunset. Crickets resumed their chorus as headlights vanished. At dawn, a herdsman guiding thirsty cattle toward the stream noticed vultures circling low. Curious, he followed the birds and stumbled upon a sight that stilled his breath, Uchenna's lifeless form, eyes glassy in the gray morning. He ran to the village, shouting the news. Soon a knot of people formed by the lonely road. They stared, speaking in hushed tones. "The younger brother. Greed dragged him here. How can envy ride so hard that blood means nothing?" No wails, no tears, only the quiet lesson etched in everyone's mind. The pit you dig in darkness may yet demand your own bones. Word reached Jyoke as masons laid tiles on his balcony. He dismissed his workers early and walked alone toward the place where the crowd still lingered, heart heavy with an ache deeper than betrayal. Yet even grief could not erase the truth branded across village memory now. Kindness had survived bullets, while malice perished by its own hand. Dawn found the village unusually quiet. Smoke curled from kitchen fires, but chatter hovered only in half-spoken sentences. The shocking tale of the previous night, of a lifeless body found near the bush road, moved from ear to ear like a restless spirit. Few dared mention the name aloud, yet everyone knew, Uchenna, the once proud younger brother, was gone. Jaok sat beneath the broad mango that shaded the front of his nearly finished mansion. He had just handed a bowl of gari to a passing child when an elderly widow approached, her wrapper brushing the sandy path. She spoke gently, as if afraid the words might turn to ash. "Son, they found your brother on the lonely track. The Lord has called him." The sentence struck like dry season thunder. Jaok rose, but strength melted from his knees, and he sank back onto the wooden stool. Tears gathered without permission. He pressed his palms over his face, breath hitching. In that moment titles, plots of land, and walls of concrete meant nothing. What remained was the memory of two boys chasing dragonflies behind their father's hut. When the first wave of grief eased, he wiped his eyes and whispered, "Blood cannot be replaced." No one around him spoke. Some villagers expected curses or blame. Instead, they watched their wealthiest neighbor weep as any brother would. Though shock clamped Jayok's heart, he moved quickly to give Uchenna a final dignity. Carpenter Kenachukwu received cash up front to craft a fine coffin. Market women stitched linen cloth pure as moonlight. The town priest was invited to conduct prayers, and a modest choir rehearsed to him about forgiveness. Jayok chose a spot behind Uchenna's bungalow, the house once raised in arrogance, and cleared it himself, refusing hired help. The new grave would be closer to the living than the lonely crossroads where the body had fallen. On the day of burial, the sun shone with soft mercy. Villagers gathered in quiet clusters, avoiding the gossip that had burned so hot only weeks before. When time came to speak, Jayok stepped forward. His voice wavered, yet carried far. "My brother stumbled, as we all can. Let this soil cover our grievances. May he rest where storms of envy cannot follow." Heads bowed, some out of respect, others out of shame for past mockery. A few elders wiped eyes clouded not by dust but by the weight of their own mistakes. They had witnessed many funerals, but none where the wronged man paid every expense without a word of blame. The legacy begins. Grief, rather than crippling Jayok, deepened his resolve to build something kinder than monuments of stone. He returned to the fenced plot, hired geologists to test deeper layers, and soon unearthed more glittering stones. Each discovery tightened suspicion outside the village, but inside, prosperity began to trickle like fresh spring water. The first project finished was a small clinic, 4 beds, tiled floors, solar lights humming quietly through the night. People who once traveled miles for medicine now received help at their doorstep. Next came a bright-painted primary school. Children who had spent mornings beneath mango trees studying on slates now traced letters on real desks. Jayok insisted that every desk carry a brass tag reading knowledge outlives riches. A third undertaking shone even brighter, a foundation fund for orphans and struggling students. The jeweler from the city guided Jayok in setting up proper accounts so that greed could not nibble away the edges. Scholarships soon bore fruit. One girl won a state science fair, another boy wrote essays that reached national newspapers. Each victory echoed back to the quiet farmer who had buried his sibling without spite. Idle youth who once leaned against beer parlor walls found new callings as masons, carpenters, even tractor operators. Jayok paid them daily and on Fridays sat with them under the neem tree, sharing roasted corn and listening to their plans. Whenever someone thanked him, he answered the same way, "We are growing this harvest together." A new beginning. Months drifted into a festive season, and rumors spread of another celebration, not of buildings or bursaries, but of love. Jayok's fiancée, Adiz, entered the village carrying little more than a suitcase of lesson notes and a gentle smile. As a teacher she had heard of the new school, as a woman of faith she admired the man behind it. Their wedding day dawned in a riot of color. Processions of dancers from 3 neighboring villages wound through the freshly tarred road to the church. Reporters balanced cameras atop tripods beside okra patches, hungry for the image of a farmer-turned-philanthropist. Yet the ceremony itself remained simple. Vows exchanged beneath woven palm arches, hymns rising to a sky that seemed to bless humility. When evening canopies filled with laughter, Jayok slipped away for a moment, walking to Uchenna's grave. He placed a single hibiscus bloom on the mound. "Brother," he murmured, "your story warned me against pride. Mine will teach our children mercy." The wind rustled the young cassava shoots nearby, almost like an answer. Moral: Generosity sown in secret bears fruit in public. Wealth can build walls, but mercy builds bridges that outlast stone.